welcome to Property Quorum. Well, we have the hopeful few returned, the stalwarts of this wonderful piece of journalistic prose, I hope. Once again, we have Hamish McLay of Search Convey, of course, Michelle Carr of Taking the Con Out of Construction, the faithful Juliet Baboolal of Gullah Cook LLP, and the incredulous Chris Gilsenan route home, fighting with his technology. And we are once again here to discuss what the hell's going on in the property market. And today's podcast is no different in that respect. We're talking about the private sector's advantage, how traders can capitalize on government inaction. And of course, as is traditional on this channel, I'm throwing Hamish straight under the bus.
Well, welcome on a Tuesday. Not the normal Thursday, but a weekday that begins with tea. So
well,
here we
I watched the inauguration last night. I don't think anything is ever going to be normal again.
Well, if we carry on doing the same things the same way, we end up with the same results.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we're going to have a breakout from that. And this is one of the topics I felt was important. Our government, it's great that the government come in and they recognise. Trouble is, our previous government's done exactly the same thing. Recognise we have a shortage of housing, and it requires at least some governmental input to get the whole thing rolling. And what we've had so far is nothing to actually sort of accelerate or burst up anybody's confidence to actually sort of dive in and do things. And I mean, so often when speaking to sort of Chris will say that there was always opportunity. And it's like the difficulty is, I guess, finding it. But if you're an expert and know where to look, however, we find ourselves in something of a predicament. Something serious has to happen to get anything like the volume of manufacture that we last saw in the 1960s. That's a long, long time to go back to this particular sort of volume. One would have thought we had more builders. One would have thought we had more tradesmen. And all of these things to contribute towards being able to increase a volume that was last produced at that particular period of time. But it doesn't appear that way in terms of we're not at the best time of year for people to start getting onto building sites and building things. We've got the wrong weather. We've got the wrong temperatures. However, things can be going on in the background.
Nothing to do with me.
That is jolly, though.
All right. Well, I'm going to grab Juliet Baboolal and say to you, Juliet, it's nothing like when people grab the bull by the horns and start building. And is this nothing like that? Or do we actually have something? Will the government actually take some notice this time?
Well, I mean, they've got to make informed decisions. And the question is, are the decision makers as informed as we'd like them to be? And clearly, it's been a repeat throughout the years, as Hamish said, whether it's the last government or this one, are they going to make the changes that we need to be made? And I go back to the fact that it needs to be informed. Cash is king, and I'd say that. And so people who've got money at their disposal can do all sorts of things, whether it be negotiate things on planning permissions. I saw one the other day where a developer was able to negotiate removal of affordable housing as a planning condition in exchange for some money. So, cash is king. If you're able to drum up that level of money, then negotiations are there to be had without having your hands tied. Whereas if you're going in for a mortgage, then obviously you need to be compliant with mortgage laws, etc. So I do think, the government's in action. There is always opportunity. I agree with what you said earlier. Chris thinks there's always an opportunity. There really is. There's always a trend, but it's really riding that wave at the right time. And I just think the people who benefit the most are the ones with wads of cash in the background, who are able to just make quick decisions and not be tied into sort of red tape.
Well, okay, I always look towards Chris for my silver linings. So here we are. We are once again, and it feels like Groundhog Day, with the spectre of, we must build lots more houses. So there's lots of opportunity as ever, right?
I was waiting for the question.
Well, the question is, should I believe it? Is it a real thing, or is it just Groundhog Day again?
There's a massive credibility issue here with the government, and there's a discrepancy between actions and words.
How nicely put.
And it's a bit tough. It's a big one.
Right.
Juliet's absolutely right. At the moment, cash is king. So there are huge amounts of opportunities. The big challenge with the government where it is at the moment is there's massive amounts of uncertainty. So they've said all these weird and wonderful things about how we're going to step forwards, but they've not put any sort of plan in place about how they're going to deliver it. They're not even talking, or as far as I'm aware, engaging with the people who are capable of doing the delivery. So it's a confusing state at this point in time. The challenge with that is the lenders, institutional lending, kind of dries up a little bit. They get a little bit more twitchy about instability and not knowing which direction things are going to go. So that level of uncertainty doesn't particularly help the property world, which is, it brings me back around to Juliet's point why cash is king, in that if you're not relying on institutional lending, if you do have private lending, private cash, or just a slush fund that you can access, then you are in a very strong position, because for those people, it is to an extent business as usual, where you're not relying on government bringing the next thing along or interfering too much. But yeah, there are some real big risk elements with them tearing up the rule book, but not having actually implemented a new framework that we should be working to. So that level of guidance is massively lacking at this point.
Dear Michelle, welcome. There seems to be an inverse relationship between the amount of confidence in the marketplace and the amount of time it's taking for a government to actually respond. Are we at the point where confidence is at an all-time low within the buildings industry?
I think confidence is at an all-time low within all industries, within the entire country. So, and I'm not sure that's the key point. I mean, for me, what my major concerns is the fact that, yes, we might be building more housing, but there has been a lot of development around. I mean, I'm in South London, sorry. There's been a lot of development around here, and there's a lot of empty property. So there's some high-rise flat blocks of flats, and they're empty. So there's a number of issues. Obviously, you're all aware of the situation with some of the flats that can't be sold because of cladding issues. You've got brand new flats that can't be purchased because they're too expensive for the first-time buyers, because you're looking at hundreds of thousands of pounds, which is way over the first-time buyers. So maybe the professional market. There's a huge shortage in my local area for 4-bedroom houses. I've got friends of mine that have been trying to find a 4-bedroom house for 2 years unsuccessfully. They're now looking at 3-bedroom houses and then doing an extension. But also new builds, which we've had this conversation before, they're so extortionately priced. They're also bringing up the prices of and overvaluing other houses in the area, which are outpricing it. So everyone's struggling with money. None of the incentives. So somebody put something on LinkedIn today, I read, about parents and why there's a shortage in new babies because both parents work. There's no incentives. Yes, you have the tax-free childcare, but childcare is ridiculously expensive. And I know that very well because I have twins. So it's expensive. They don't have the childcare tax credit schemes or voucher schemes anymore. And it's just people are struggling to afford these ridiculous prices. Okay, I'm obviously based in London. London prices are different from anywhere else, but there's so many people moving out, moving away. Many people I know are moving abroad because they can't afford to stay in the UK anymore. Like there's a much bigger thing. And regardless if you get these houses and whether you build them, it's whether or not people can afford them with the interest rate, stamp duty and everything else to move. It's just becoming ridiculous that prices and salaries aren't going up and things aren't going up and we don't have enough money to pay for it all. And I think And you've got the affordable housing element, but that's majority of the country aren't eligible. So I think somehow the government needs to put a cap on building new houses, and I put a cap on the price and how much money the big builders make out of it to make it affordable for everyone, not just either blue light workers or teachers or key workers or people that are on some form of a benefit scheme. It needs to be affordable for everybody. And I think that's the big problem.
Hamish, dear Michelle seems to be painting a rather bleak picture that nobody can bloody afford to do anything anyway. So where are we at?
I think that challenge isn't going away. When I was last teaching in Reading, which was that was quarter of a century back, there were serious challenges there because the key workers, people like teaching. I was doing some work for the for Reading Council in their education department, and sort of covering for sort of senior members of staff there with absences. Interestingly enough, teachers always seem to be having nervous breakdowns, particularly head teachers and deputy head teachers, and I would cover for them until they got replacements. But there was a big challenge as well, which is one of the reasons why I was working for Reading Council. There was a desperate shortage of key workers, desperate shortage of teachers. They could not afford to live in Reading and teach there because Reading was seriously expensive, not terribly far from London. There was a lot of work available actually to live in Reading. It's quite interesting where I am now. I live actually in sort of Bicester. There's massive developments here because loads of land has been made free. Because the strange thing is that the government have the availability of so much housing stock in this area. But why? Because this isn't where there's a shortage, but the prices are seriously expensive. But what is happening here in Bicester, and I think this actually goes in there, puts in place what Michelle was saying, particularly, is the cost. Because the cost, I think this is the third most expensive Oxfordshire area to live in. I think Bristol has become the second most expensive outside of London, and I think Oxfordshire is now the third. But they're building all of these particular sort of houses, or they've got the ability. But I say they could be building, but the number of new houses available is very, very slow. Now, they've got the planning permissions. They've been building on both of these sites for over 5 years now, and they've slowed down. So desperately something needs to actually sort of happen, but it is the availability of that cash, and that's what actually sort of concerns me. We don't need extra housing here. We've got full employment here, and in fact, what they do, they get planning permission to we'll put another warehouse up, so they've got more jobs. Siemens, they're opening up their largest factory, I think, in the world, and there's going to be 1,000 people working there, just off the M40. Now, I guess they're going to need houses, or are they? They're going to travel in. It's just off the M40, just off the A34. I don't know, but it's doing the right things in the right places. And here at the moment, houses are not moving at all. They're not being built, and people are therefore not moving in them. It's not helping the local economy either. So we've got this big whammy effect. It's not because people aren't moving into new houses. As Michelle was sort of intimated, I think, particularly first-time buyers, they can't afford to move in. We've got the serious cladding issues with flats. So what's going to happen? How is the private sector going to break through, or can it break through?
It's a very good question, Juliet. To return to the original premise here, that there is a private sector advantage, but how can there be much of a private sector advantage when most of the Western world seems to have a serious under amount of cash available to them?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the issue. And somebody mentioned, private lenders coming into the fore, and while they can pump money into the system, it's incredibly expensive. So you've got developers who are saying, look, I'm going to go to a private subprime lender to get my development on the go, and then they've got to jump through every single loop. So you kind of question, is it really worth it in the end? Because for these developers, they aren't making any profits. So you've gone through everything, and then you're paying back all of this exorbitant interest. What's the point of it? And Michelle mentioned having these unsold properties, but you drive past London and there are all of these unbuilt abandoned development sites where developers have gone bust. There's no more funding, there's no stepping in, there's no continuing. Why aren't the government looking at that? And that's where, as we say, informed decisions are important. Gone are the days when you can just present to us statistics, with things like Google, etc. You can just see those statistics are worthless if they're not in the right places, So you've got too much housing in Oxfordshire, but too little housing in London. What are they going to do about it? And that is key. I think having the decision makers, being guided by more informed sources is important, but also reality checking. If we were given the facts, the true facts, and not being sold some statistics or some dream or some unachievable end, then perhaps we as consumers could better understand where we're at and what we need to do. There's a true checklist, a true measure at that point. At the moment, you're sold stuff in a manifesto that they can never deliver, and now you're being you've got the wool pulled over your eyes as if you're silly and you don't understand the system. The average consumer does understand. The average consumer received a message from their council saying your council tax, especially in London, is going to be doubled. I mean, so you're talking about new time buyers or first time buyers actually not being able to afford to get on. But what about the existing ones who've just purchased properties, they've budgeted, and now just that extra increase in council tax has gone over their affordability. So they've got to think, where am I going to get that extra money from?
Wow. Okay. Well, I wasn't expecting quite a tirade, but I think Juliet's gone on the money, Chris.
It's absolutely right. The government could solve this overnight. I could show you my Searchland aggregated data sets now that show you all the local authorities, all the planning decisions, all the availability of housing stock in these areas, and all the councils that aren't going to hit their targets because they haven't done anything about it, because they haven't brought certain things forwards. So all the plots are there. Juliet's already mentioned it. We know exactly where the demand is, exactly where the sites are, exactly what's been brought forward, what's got planning permission. It just needs the government to step in and actually acquire some of these sites and fund the delivery, and crucially retain ownership. Don't do a repeat of the 80s sell-off of the council houses.
Michelle, what do you think of that?
No, I totally agree. I think one of the selling off all of the council properties was a big mistake. A lot of people made a lot of money out of it, so not so bad for those particular individuals. But I do think it's difficult. But the other thing is, I think there's an aspect of greed involved. I mean, do you remember the days where you had a vast reduction in the price of your property because you bought off plan? Yeah. And I think one of the reasons some of the developers are going bust is because initially they will sell X amount off plan, and you'd have to wait a year for it. But you got it at reduced value, but they got cash flow, and that's what happens. These properties and these projects, when they get to the end of them, there's profit there. But if you don't have the cash to pay the contractors, because so many contractors that we're speaking to at the moment for smaller projects are done with building houses because they have to wait 9 months sometimes for their money, and they just can't survive. And they'd much happy to, which is great for us because they're quite happy to shift, and they've got the teams and they've got the regular work with us, and they get paid quickly. And I just think, yes, we've got a lot of builders, but they don't want to work on these big housing projects because no one gets paid. It's ridiculous.
What a conundrum. Hamish, find me a chink of light in all this.
One of the things that sort of worries me about some of these podcasts we have, you always put it to me towards the end of it and say, right, Hamish, show us.
You are our golden saviour, Hamish.
Well, yes, it's what we think and what we do that makes a difference. And thinking is one thing, but there needs to be the action, the activity. Absolutely. And I think there's a clear aspect here. The government, unfortunately, we're relying on the government, I think, for a little bit too much at the moment. We need the government to release funds itself to actually sort of put into the places where they should be investing to get the houses built. We know, in fact, the great thing, but doesn't become aware of the amount of information that Chris has to hand. He can actually advise the government, hey, look, guys, this is what you need to do.
This is information they should already have, surely.
Yeah, but they probably need to sort of set up yet another Clango to work on it. But the trouble is, they're developing a Clango a week at the moment, it would appear, and that's money that's being spent in the public sector again.
Before
as a public sector, we're paying for that. Each Quango, each new, but they are not coming up with the right conclusions within sufficient pattern. So there's two things really. If they were to give incentive to investors again, let's get back to the situation where people have confidence in what's going on, so the investors can come in. Because as we said, the investors, any investor if they're waiting the length of time now that it seems to take, look, we know the government want this to happen, but activity is key. And of course, one of the particular sort of elements there is confidence. So there's two aspects to it. Let's sort of see if we can get some confidence sort of put back into the economy from somewhere. Because I think what we've got too many distractions at the moment, which are preventing people, even the private sector, from getting involved as much as they would like to get involved with.
Well, before Chris creates any more Black Mirror episodes, I would like to thank all of you for taking the time out today to talk about what is obviously something that Juliet can get people right hot under the collar. And she likes living in tropical climate. Thank you once again, Hamish McLay, for helping put this together, Chris Gilsenan of Root, of course, Juliet Baboolal, and supporting us and taking the con out of construction, Michelle Carr. And thank you guys for watching. This is the second one of the new year. We very much are looking to ramp up our viewership this year. So if you do find people out there aren't yet riled up enough about what is or isn't happening in construction, I would really love it if you could become viewers. Until the next time, try and keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and look after that mental health. Bye-bye now.